Hey Hustlers! On today's episode of the HUSTLR podcast, I am joined by Shirag Shemmassian, the founder of a consulting agency, Shemmassian Academic Consulting. So over the last 15 years, Shirag has helped thousands of students get accepted into America's top colleges, med schools and law schools at unprecedented rates using his exclusive approach. And he's been doing this for 15 years, okay? So quick fact, his students have more than 90% success rate in getting into med school at the first time they apply. So in this episode, we'll dive deep into what got him started, the strategies he's used to grow his business, and I don't know about you, but I would love to know the secrets that he uses to such effectiveness to get a big percentage of his students into med school, law school, and the top colleges. If you want to learn more, stay tuned to the end of this episode, okay? Hey Shirag, thanks for coming on to the HUSTLR podcast. So let's start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and the journey of starting your business.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Shirag Shemmassian. So I'm originally from Los Angeles, but I moved to San Diego about 3 years ago with my wife, and we now have a son. He's 14 months old, and he started speaking his first words like 2 days ago, which is kind of crazy and exciting. My background, I'm a psychologist by training, but I help students get into top colleges and medical schools. It's something I've been doing for over 15 years. The way I started my business was fairly organic. Back when I was in high school, I wanted to go to a really, really good college, but we had not very good college counseling support at my school. So I sort of learned everything I could, and I was able to get into Cornell and graduate from there. And along the way, people were just asking me for a ton of support. So they were saying, oh, like you got into Cornell, can you help me? Or you got all these scholarships, can you help me? And over time, just word of mouth grew. And then after many years of helping people, I sort of decided to launch a more official business. And so I let my parents know. I remember I was starting a business, and then I, started a website and then started blogging. And it sort of all blossomed from there.
Right. So you mentioned that you started on with a website and a blog. So when was that? You started the entire business 15 years ago with word of mouth, referrals, and stuff like that. But when did you decide to start a blog?
Yeah. So I think we launched the website in 2013. But I didn't have much on there. It was just sort of like, you could think about it like a big, like business card, where it was just like my name, my information, a little bit about what we do. And in I want to say in like late 2014, I probably started writing my first few articles. But it was really in 2015 when I started blogging more seriously. That was also kind of born of necessity because, I want to send our students certain resources, about various aspects of the admissions processes that they were working on. And I didn't find, articles that I thought were meaty enough or went deep enough into certain topics. So I decided to write on my own. And over time, I was just blogging here and there, but I was writing pretty long pieces because I wanted, my students to have, this is a really informative piece or something like that. And over time, Google just started, I think, pushing our content up in their search rankings because we started getting a lot of people contacting us. And I'm like, who are these people? Like, how did they find us? And so I experienced, accidental SEO. But that was after some time of writing for some time. And then I decided to, figure out like, I can totally, figure out how to make this more repeatable rather than just an accident. And that's what I did.
Right. So it sounds like, you started blogging to serve your students in the beginning, but you end up accidentally serving a lot more other people that's interested in what you have to say. So previously, I'm assuming that you didn't have a publishing schedule because you just produced whatever you think or you thought your student needed to know more about, right? But what about now? Do you have a consistent publishing schedule or anything like that when it comes to blogging?
We do. So in the beginning, it was just like anytime I was getting, anytime my students were asking a lot of questions about X, I was like, okay, it's time to write an article about X. And so just serving, serving what their needs were. So it was, I guess to some degree, it was like, what I think people want, but I was close enough to my customers, right? So like I'm working with these people every day. They ask me certain questions, so I know. And I think that's a very important like first lesson for blogging. Like think about what your customers want, right? Like because I think a lot of people get like really stuck in like search for keywords and blah blah. Everyone uses the same tools to find keywords. You can use Google tools, Ahrefs, all these things. So everyone is like knows what keywords to write about. It's how you write about them, and there's no, I think, replacement for actually talking to people. Because sometimes when you talk to people, the way they talk about certain problems they're having or the way they talk about certain keywords is very different than what you think about how they think, right? So there's no substitute for actually talking to people and getting a sense, because that's when you write really, really good content. And then, yeah, so in the beginning, it was just me, like whenever I had time, I was like, oh, like I have a few hours, I feel like writing, I'll write. Now we publish at least one article a week on our site. And these tend to be very lengthy, like at least 1,500 words each.
1,500 words each, right?
So like 7 pages of material.
Yep. So you mentioned that you started this business 15 years ago, right? So did you have a full-time job, while running this business, or how did it all get started?
Yeah, I mean, so in the beginning, I mean, I was in school, I was in college, then I was in graduate school. And so I was, I guess, full-time student the entire time. It was near the end of graduate school where I decided to launch things more officially. And then, so I was just doing it sort of as a side hustle, I guess. A lot of people were asking for support. I was like, how can I make some extra money for my wife and me? And I was like, okay, I'll do this side hustle. I like it. My students are very successful and stuff like that. So launched a business that way. But yeah, for even after launching it, so I finished grad school and I was working full time as a psychologist for 5 years before I actually left my full time job about 2 months ago, and now focus on the business full time.
So how do you juggle between all these things, like having a side hustle and a full time job?
Yeah, so for you, it was really hard. So as like the, full-time job's pretty consistent, right? Like you sort of know what it's going to be like every day. And then, I have time that I want to spend with my wife and my friends. And that's like pretty, like I want to spend a certain amount of time with everyone that I love. But the business was different because it was growing. And I was like, oh, like, I'm spending a lot of time on this. So after some time, like I was starting to sacrifice. I was like, oh, maybe maybe I have to sleep less, or I have to do this other thing less, or something like that. And so, I think like over time, there were things where it's like, I have to decide, how do I want to spend my days? And then when I got news that my, son, or my wife was pregnant with our son, I was like, oh gosh, like I have to rethink all of these different aspects of the business, because I can't just keep doing what I'm doing now and it be okay. So that's when I got really, really into like systematizing various aspects of the business so that I can free up, my time to spend with my wife and my son and friends and things like that. Over time, the business just like continued to grow. And between the job and my son and wife and business and stuff, I didn't have enough time. And I realized that I was spending a little less time with my family than I wanted. And that's so important to me. So I decided to leave my full-time job so I can focus a little on home life.
Right. So your kid is 14 years old, 14 months old now.
Yeah.
Right. So that's like July last year. So how has having a child changed the way you treat this business?
Yeah, it's it definitely makes me think a lot about offloading things off my plate, because like with kids, it's like, it can be kind of unpredictable, right? I mean,
Uh-huh.
we're very fortunate that, we have grandparents nearby, and during the day, like, they can spend time with them and all that kind of stuff. But it's so easy for work to like spill into the evenings or spill into the weekends and stuff like that. So just being very thoughtful about, how do I sort of organize my business? When do I take client calls? When do I focus on work versus family? It just, I think, has forced me to, be a little more regimented in my life.
Mm-hmm. So how many hours, just curious, how many hours do you put into this business each day now?
Oof. It depends on the day. Like Mondays are very busy for me. I might put in like 12 to 14 hours a day on a Monday, but then because that's when I like to front load my work so that the week gets easier over time. But yeah, it'll typically be, on a Friday, maybe like 8 hours. And then on weekends, just a few maintenance things, like maybe an hour on Saturday or 2 hours on Saturday, something like that. And so yeah, depending on the day, it could look wildly different, but my week gets easier as time goes on.
I see. So do you put in like do you plan to work less over the next 5 years or anything like that? Are you doing anything to automate certain aspects of your work, to reduce the time that you put into the business?
Totally. Yes, it's tricky because I genuinely love the business. So I think in the beginning I thought of it more as work, but now it's kind of weird. And maybe you've had this feeling too, like it sort of turns into your hobby too. So now if I like have 3 hours free and I'm home alone, I won't watch a movie. I'll like work on my business or something. And I don't know if that's good or bad. Some people might be like, that's not healthy, and other people will be like, cool. And so that's how it is for me. So it's not like I feel like, oh, I need to, spend less time on it because I don't like it. I really do love it. But yeah, there are certain aspects that, aren't my favorite, or, I think other people can do just as well. And I'm also learning, I think, to be a CEO and to manage people and stuff like that. Like, you can read all the books you want on being a CEO and a manager and stuff. It's just very different doing it. So I try to like grow with the business and not so quickly that I don't know how to actually manage it, right? Because I want to make sure that like my team is like operating at a really high level. But that's actually a current thing for me right now, which is figuring out like, what should I be doing? What should others be doing? Yeah, that'll be the story of the next little bit.
Right. So you mentioned that in the beginning you built your business through referrals, like people came to you for help. People were asking you, okay, how do you do this? How do you get into Cornell so easily, for example? So that's how you landed your first clients, right? But 15 years later, now, how do you land your clients now most of the time?
Yeah. So a big thing. So word of mouth is still big because it's an exponential thing. When you have one person, they can only tell so many people, and then if you have thousands of people over time, now they can tell a lot more people. So that's really big for us. Then SEO is really big for us. So people finding us organically through Google has been very valuable for the business. So just putting out really helpful blog content and video content and things like that, and people finding us saying, wow, that's really good information, I should get in touch with them. Those are really the two pillars of finding people.
So how does your growth trajectory look like over the past 15 years with SEO kicking in and stuff? Does it look like a hockey stick? I don't know.
Yeah. So it definitely would be. I've never charted it, but I think it would look like a hockey stick. No, for all those years, I mean, remember, I was in school. I was like, I was actually doing it, like helping people for free for many, many years, probably for like 8 years, just like didn't charge anyone anything when people were asking for help.
8 years before 15 years ago? Like,
yeah. So like,
wow.
I would say, yeah, 8 to 9 years. I like didn't like, cause again, I was just like, I was in school. I was like, I didn't really have good help. Like, yeah, I'd love to help you. I really like admissions. I'm a total nerd. Like I have a bunch of books on it. I learn about it all the time. Like I'm very weird that way. No one likes, admissions as much as me, at least no one I know. And so like I was doing it, and it's when I was like, oh, I should like start a side hustle. I didn't even call it a side hustle that way. I was like, I should make, I want a second income or whatever. And that's when I started charging. We were working with, much fewer people, charging super little. And over time it sort of grew. And business has, ever since I sort of made it an official thing and started charging, it's more than doubled each year.
Wow. Like over the past 15 years, it's been...
No. So there's the 15 years. The first, let's call it 9 or whatever, I didn't charge anyone anything. So there was zero. It was this part of the stick. And then when I started, charging it, then it's been like that.
Okay. So the first 8 to 9 years, you were essentially doing charity, aren't you, Shirag?
Yeah. Exactly.
So I wouldn't call it a business,
Yeah.
Right. But that was just a joke. So really awesome value bombs over there. So let's talk a little bit more about your day-to-day. How do you actually help your students get admitted into the top schools?
Yeah, so it really depends on what it is, like where they come to us. So a large group of students come to us at like the application phase, which is, they've done all these years of work, they've taken courses, they've taken tests and whatnot. And then they'll say, okay, now I need help with the actual application. And so that's when we'll get to know them very, very well. We'll ask them questions about them, we'll review their resumes, and we'll essentially help them craft these essays where they can tell stories to admissions committees and get in. There's a subset of students who starts way sooner, years ahead of time, so that we can help prep them, like what classes to take, who to build relationships with so they can eventually get recommendation letters, when to take standardized tests, what extracurricular activities to participate in, essentially, helping them prepare themselves for that eventual application.
So you mentioned that some of them they become your clients rather early in their journey. So how old are the younger ones? Like how old is the youngest student ever that has ever joined?
Yeah. So if someone, signs up in 9th grade because they want to get into like Harvard for college, the earliest someone would sign up is 13 or 14 years old. And that's when we would just guide them on every step of the way until they get into a great school. But then, some people, let's say they come to us at the beginning of college because they want to go to medical school, then they might be 17 or 18. So it depends on which admissions process. Is it college? Is it medical school? And then also like, is it right at the application point versus years? So yeah, I say our clients range, 99% of our clients will be somewhere between like 14 and 24 years old.
Right. So 14 years old, does this, does how early they join, does that dictate their success, their rate of success?
Yes. So when students join early, then we can prep them, really, really well. If someone comes to me during the application year and says, oh, help me get in, I can only work with what they have done up to that point. I have no influence before that point. But if someone comes to us 9th grade, 10th grade, whatever, then we can have years where we've prepped them into, really good college applicants, and then they can apply the right way. So yeah, essentially, the more we can impact their work up to that point, we can be more confident that, hey, when they eventually apply, they're going to have a certain level of strength.
Right. So one more, I have this question, right? Like, I'm very curious. Do say Harvard, Yale, like they both have law schools, if I'm not mistaken, and do they have different admission requirements per se?
So requirements are often the same at top schools. So like if you're talking about Harvard and Yale medical school or Harvard and Yale law school and stuff like that. They're both really hard to get into. They're both very prestigious. What it takes to get into those is they're kind of similar, right? Like you need great grades, great test scores, and then a certain level of like extracurricular achievement. And if you do those things at a certain level, then you will be competitive at both of those.
Okay.
But it's not like one requires you to take a certain class that the other doesn't. It's not like that. The sort of foundational requirements are the same. It's just what level are you achieving at?
Right. Okay. Cool. So 15 over the last 15 years, how did you manage your hiring and stuff? I know you just quit your job 2 months back, and there's just more clients are coming in. So how big is your team right now?
Yeah. So I don't know the exact number, but I would say we have about 40 people who are supporting students, and different people focus on different things. Like some people focus on like medical school or college more, or law or things like that. But yeah, I actually didn't bring anyone on. I think the first person that I brought on to help was back in 2016. I was giving a talk actually related to psychology, and there was a woman in the audience who said, "Oh, like I like helping people with that stuff too." And I said, "Oh, like, well, maybe, as we're growing, like, would you like to work with some of our students?" She said, yes. She's still with us. She's wonderful. And then another one was like my friend. So it was very slow. Like, I think it was like year one when I brought someone on, it was one person, I think two at the end of the year. Next year was like 5 total, and then 20. And then, so it just sort of kind of grew quickly once the hiring started.
Wow. So, before you quit your job, say July last year, how many people did you have on your team?
Yeah. So it was literally in August 2019. Yeah, so about the same that we have now, so around 40 people.
Wow, so you actually had a full-time day job and managing 40 different people?
That's right.
Wow, so how do you juggle that,
Yeah, so that's where the systems come in, right? Like, so there's all the like process documentation of this is how you support students, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then there's other internal stuff like, obviously difficulties will come up sometimes, like either, you get stuck or you get a question you don't know the answer to, or maybe unfortunately like a student's really, really struggling and you're not sure how to motivate them, stuff like that. So I was getting a lot of questions, of course, like, hey, my student said X or isn't responding or whatever happened. And so I created another like set of documentation for this is how you handle every situation that comes up. And so that's like pages and pages and pages long, because it's based on all these years of doing this work. So we've pretty much seen everything. And so essentially, if you hire really, really well and then hand them really good resources, that takes away, 98, 99% of the work. And then anything that comes up and it's like, if someone's still confused, and then I'll add that to the documentation, right? So it just sort of grows and the questions get less and less over time.
Okay. So you mentioned that hiring good people will probably solve 98 to 99% of a lot of these issues. So how do you judge these candidates?
Yeah. So in my space, it's, I just really care about someone who's very bright, right? Very smart. Who knows the admissions process well. So obviously if they've been successful, like if they got into Harvard and Stanford Medical School and things like that, then they obviously know how to navigate this stuff. Someone who has experience helping other people, they're really organized and really nice, right? Because if I helped you get in, but I wasn't very nice to you, you're going to be like, oh, I didn't like working with those people. But if you have if you get in and you have a good experience, then you're going to be like, oh, these people are awesome, right? So that's what I judge for. So I look for personal achievements. So that's when I review their resume. I also review their writing because they have to be good writers if they're going to help people. and then I test their editing work. So I'll give them like sample essays and see how they edit, because that's the work they're going to be doing. So I actually want to see them perform the job that they're going to be hired for. And then the final thing is an interview. So, making sure that they're like really easy to talk to. If I'm having a hard time talking to them, our students might also have a hard time talking to them and, interacting with them. So I want to make sure that they're really easy to get along with too. So if I hit those three things: personal achievement, knowledge of the admissions process, ability to edit really great essays, and then three, like interpersonally, they're very warm, then that's the job. So I guess my advice there is try to give people stuff to do during the interview process that reflects what they will be doing on the job.
I see. Okay, I think that's very, very valuable, especially for newer employers. So you mentioned that on your website that more than 90% of your students get admitted in the top schools in their first application, right? So what about the remaining less than 10%? Like what happens with these students?
Yeah, so I guess it depends, right? So this is where we can't control everything too, right? So with an admissions process, when you submit your application to, let's say, Yale or Princeton or something like that, we can do everything we can on our end, but it's not 100% in our hands, right? So if a student came to us senior year and they haven't prepped themselves very well beforehand, then we can do our best with the application, but there's some out of our hands. But even if you prepped really, really, really well, like some of these schools have like less than a 5% chance of getting in. So just statistically, it won't always work. So for like college, like I said, over 90% get into one or more of their top three choices. With the remaining people, it's, they might get into choice number 4 or something like that, or something over there. But that's the unfortunate part of admissions, where you can't, predict or control everything. It's not like, cooking pasta. If you have the ingredients and you have control over everything, you can produce it. There's a little bit out of our hands, unfortunately.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So there's one more thing that I wanted to ask you earlier on, but I forgot. So, but you mentioned that the earliest students that come to your, that engage you are 14 years old. Do they make these decisions themselves, or do their parents make these decisions most of the time?
Great question. So like for college admissions, it really depends. There are some students who are really high achieving and they want extra help. So they'll sign up for extra help. And they'll ask their parents like, hey, like, can you sign up? But for high school, most of the time it is parents who approach us and they say, hey, look, our kids are really high achieving and they want to go to these, schools that are really tough to get into. Would you help them? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then we help their students. For graduates, for like medical school, it's usually the students who approach us because, they're older, they have a lot of that self-motivation to search and contact us. And then we'll talk to them, and then, they'll go to talk to their parents, and their parents will pay. So, the person paying is almost always the parents, but then our students, find us and reach out to us and all that stuff.
Right. So off the top of your head, do you have any particular success stories from your students that you'd like to share with me and my audience? Like,
sure. There are so many, students who like get really, really excited and, who have very interesting backgrounds. So I always think of there was one student who, had various, like disabilities and things like that. And, struggled in school a little bit in the beginning because like classwork wasn't always like interesting, or is having trouble focusing, and for various reasons he struggled academically here and there, but he was very, very smart, right? And so he had some B's. I think he might have even had some C's, but like was really good in math and had done all this work around like, spreading awareness of his disability and things like that. And he wasn't a very good writer either. But like that's the type of student where we got to know him really, really well for over many months and helped him, edit all his work. And he actually got into his top choice, a top 25 school, actually a very prestigious program within that school. And that was very exciting for me because a lot of times, I've grown up with Tourette syndrome, and I've always had a heart for students with various disabilities, and a lot of times students are told, oh, like it's hard for you to get into those those good programs, or are you sure you'll succeed there? Like a lot of times, people with disabilities hear those kinds of questions, and they're very discouraging. So when that student got into a very competitive program, I was so thrilled for him because he's very deserving, and I just love seeing people with that background succeed.
Right. So how do you see a lot of what kind of advice would you give to students that they have some disabilities, and it might have impacted them emotionally negatively as well? What kind of advice would you give to them, if they wanted to get into one of the best med schools in America?
Yeah, sure. So like it's interesting because a lot of it is a lot of students are just as capable as everybody else. Unfortunately, like I said, it's this messaging of like, oh, like are you sure you could do it? Like yeah, is that really right for you? Like those kinds of questions. And then over time, they're like, oh, maybe it's not. Maybe I can't make it, right? So it's just a matter of like building their confidence back up, and letting them know like that, they can do it, and believing in them and stuff like that. Because sometimes these students, like, people haven't really believed in them for all these years, right? And so just making sure that they sort of believe in themselves enough to apply. Because if you don't think you have a chance of getting in, you might not apply, or B, you'll apply, but you won't really give it your full effort, right? We've all been there when we don't think we're really gonna get the result we want. We're like, nah, we kind of do a half-baked effort, right? It's like, fine, I'll do it, but that kind of thing. So just building confidence that the quality of their work is as high, and pushing them to actually apply, because otherwise they might shy away from that.
Right. Okay. Thanks. That's very inspiring. So one question for you. Okay. I think it's a little bit more for our audience, especially if they're just starting out and running a business. If you could start all over again since day one, just rewind back to 15 years ago, what would you have done differently with this business?
Ooh, well, like knowing what I know now.
Yeah, knowing what you know now.
Yeah, so I would be more systematic about things from the beginning. I think I had no formal business training, so I was just kind of like, oh, I'm good at admissions, I'll just help people with admissions. But I didn't like really think about the business, or like if I blogged, I didn't think about how I was blogging. So I would study more if I was getting into something. Like now, if I was gonna, let's say I was gonna start Twitter now or something like that, I would study how to do Twitter well before I would have just tweeted something and hope it works, right? Like, so I would be more systematic about everything I chose to do. The other thing is I would hire sooner. I think in hindsight, like, I think I waited way too long to bring on help. Like, for instance, I hired a marketing assistant in 2018 who has been incredibly helpful. So when you have, get help sooner so that you can open up your time to focus on the core parts of the business.
Right. And how would you make your hiring decisions? Like, say, how do you decide that you needed a marketing assistant at that point in time?
Yeah. So there are two things that lead me to hire or not hire. The first is this a critical function of the business? So for instance, like graphic design, right? My business is admissions. I think our site looks pretty good. But like for a long time, I didn't hire like any graphic designer or anything like that, because it's not like, our site doesn't need to be the prettiest thing in the world, right? Even though everyone would say, oh, like branding, logo, and stuff like that. It's like that stuff is secondary to results in my business. If I was selling you design, then maybe it's a different thing. So I've hired help. I've asked graphic designers to help, but it's only been like with little thing here, a little thing there, not like a whole redesign. Maybe we will one day. I don't know. So with marketing, it's like, yeah, that's a core function of the business, right? We have to find people, and we have to, spread the word that we're doing good work and all that kind of stuff. The second is it a bottleneck for the business if we continue to do it the way I am? So for me, if I was writing everything and publishing everything and optimizing everything and doing all of these things, like I was a bottleneck for the business. Business was slow, was not growing as fast as it could because I didn't have enough time. So that was another thing. So is it a core function? And, am I going to get stuck if I don't? Those are the two things.
That's a really good value bomb right there. So other than getting help in terms of, employees, what kind of tools have you used to help grow your business as well? Other than blogging, of course.
Yeah. So when you say grow, do you mean like ways to get customers, or just like growth? Like
anything, it can be anything.
Yeah, I mean, the business is fairly simple from a tech perspective. So like I use a lot of phone, I use a lot of email, nothing special there. What's been really helpful for me has actually been like calendar software, like Calendly. And I know there are other ones too, just because like people were always wanting to schedule calls with me, and it was like, what time can you do? What time can you do? Is that Eastern time? Is that Malaysia time? Right? Like all this stuff. And so like getting a calendar where I put my availability and people choose from there, that's opened up a crazy amount of time. HR software. So, where you're paying people and doing direct deposit and stuff like that, just managing all like the stuff around people. So I use a company called Gusto, Gusto. By the way, none of these people pay me anything. It's just, they just have good software. So thank you.
Right.
And so like these kinds of tools, very basic.
Okay. Let me just write that down for the show notes. Okay. I'm sure that some of our audience, last question, by the way, before we end this episode, I'm sure that some of our audience is actually interested in launching a consulting coaching business themselves, right? So as a veteran yourself, you've been at this for 15 years. So if there's one takeaway for our audience, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Yeah, one takeaway. Boy, these are high pressure questions. I'll just say like, with consulting especially, like just get started, right? Like, and I'll explain what I mean in a second, because I know that can be very like cliche. Just get started in that. As a consultant, probably your overhead is very low. You don't have to buy expensive machines. You don't have to, hire all these people in the beginning and stuff like that. So think about like, what am I good at? And like, what will people pay for? And, and so like, just look into that. And think about, well, what do people ask me for help with? What am I really, really good at and stuff like that? And then try to land your first client, and then try to land your second client, third client. I think sometimes people think, how am I going to get 100 clients? Don't think about 100 clients. Think about one client. And then over time, you'll learn how to price things properly. You'll learn how to systematize the business. You'll learn how to get new customers. I used to charge way too little. I had no idea how to find clients, and so all that stuff comes over time. And I think a lot of people who are considering consulting or another business sometimes say, well, how am I going to do X, Y, and Z? And they don't start. It's like, well, start so that you find out, right? So it's almost like the reverse. It doesn't have to be perfect in the beginning. It won't be. So stop putting pressure on yourself for it to be perfect from the beginning.
Cool. Thank you. Super valuable insights over there. So I know I said last question just now, but I just wanted to
no problem.
Go in deeper into especially the pricing part. How do you find out that you were pricing your services a little bit too low? I think that's a question that a lot of people want to know.
Yeah, pricing is probably like the hardest, like one of the hardest things because there's no real science behind it. People will say different things, see what your competitors are charging, what's your happy price. In other words, like what price will you be happy at doing this and stuff like that. And I think like there's a combination of stuff. Like in the beginning, I remember like there was a student who wanted all this work. And I was like, okay, $1,200. And they're like, really? I was like, yeah, 1,200. I was like, because, I felt uncomfortable asking for $1,000. Like, that was weird. And then they did. And then I was like doing so much work. And then I think I probably made like less than $10 an hour helping that student because I did so much work. And then I was like, okay, like that's definitely not my happy price, right? So that's when I knew I was like, okay, even if that was like, I'm not going to enjoy doing this work if that's what's the situation is going to be. So I'm going to raise it. I don't care. Like even if no one signs up because I'm not doing it at this price anymore, right? So like that was a very impactful story. The other thing is like I think about value now more than ever. Like sometimes people say, what, you charge like $7,000 for a package? I mean, you're just like talking to me on the phone and you're like editing essays and stuff like that. It's like, that's like how I do the work. But what I'm doing for you is actually I'm increasing your odds of getting into these really competitive programs. That's the value, right? So like you don't, like for instance, if you read an amazing book with all these important pieces of information in there, you won't say that's just words on a paper, right? So that the value of the book is not the paper it's written on. It's the information contained in it, right? So think about the value in every single thing that you do, and ask yourself, if I help my client achieve X, what would that be worth to them? Because if I told someone, hey, like, I can make your chance of getting into Harvard 3 times, is that worth $5,000 to you? Yeah, of course it is. Worth 10 times, worth 15, right? So like so think about value. And then, yeah, look around at your competitors, I guess, sort of. I don't look really much because I'm like, well, I know, how much, I know how valuable our services are. I know how good our work is and stuff like that. So I know that the value is at least this. And then you sort of like see over time. I think if no one is saying, oh, that's a little expensive, then you're too low. I think if no one's signing up and they're like, wow, everyone is half the price, then maybe you're too high. But, finding a place where I think when families say like, that's going to be a little tough or that's a little high, but like we get a really good feeling about working with you. We think you're when people are making, because let's all face it, like we all have things that we stretch our budget a little bit for if it's meaningful to us, right? Like if I really love clothes, your friend might say, what are you crazy about? Like $500 for a leather jacket? You're like, I don't know, I really love that leather jacket. Like you figure out a way to make it work. So make your services valuable enough where if people really, really care about it, they'll stretch themselves just a little bit. And I think that's a good way to think about pricing.
Wow. So I'm so glad I asked you that question because I think from your 15 years of experience, I think you pretty much nailed it to the dot when it comes to pricing. Like it makes total sense to me. So before we end this podcast, I want to thank you once again for coming on to the HUSTLR podcast and sharing all these actionable and insightful information about your business and pricing, all that kind of stuff. So is there anything else that you'd like to add on? So you can plug your services or your company, so don't be shy.
With these kinds of things, I just want to make sure to provide some advice because honestly, in the beginning, I had no idea where to look and who to trust. And everyone says one thing, a different thing. You need to try Facebook. You need to do this. You need to do that. So just, my encouragement to everyone listening is just like, anytime you're going to do something in your business, think about why. So just be thoughtful. Don't just get carried away with every single opportunity. But thank you for having me. And of course, if folks want to find me, I'm sure you'll link to it in the show notes.
Yep.
So Shemmassian Academic Consulting. Visit the website. I'm incredibly easy to reach. You can just email us, call us, and you'll reach me very easily.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much once again.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Okay.